10-year-old black boy suddenly stood up in the middle of a courtroom and shouted 2 words. The room fell into a stunned silence. His small fists clenched, his eyes burning with determination. Across the bench, the elderly judge went pale, his hand trembling as the gavel slipped from his grasp and hit the wooden desk with a sharp crack. What did this boy just say? And why would a child's words strike fear into the hearts of the most powerful people in the room? If you believe that truth should never stay buried and that justice must always prevail, hit like to support this story. And if you don't want to miss more gripping, real-life inspired stories like this, make sure to subscribe right now. Someone out there is desperately trying to silence the truth, but you will be the one to uncover it. Now, let's dive into the mystery behind this boy's shocking revelation. The air inside the courtroom was thick, suffocating with tension. It wasn't just another trial. It was a case that had drawn public attention, a case that carried weight. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being merciless, sat high above, gripping his gavel. His expression was unreadable, his voice steady as he prepared to deliver the final verdict. Across the room, the defendant, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, stood still, his fingers twitching at his sides. He had been here before, but this time was different. This time, it was the end. The jury had already cast their judgment. The sentence was moments away. A hush fell over the room. Then, a voice shattered the silence. "He's innocent." The words cut through the stillness like a blade, sharp and unyielding. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Heads turned, searching for the source. And there he was. A 10-year-old black boy stood at the back of the room, barely visible among the towering adults. His small fists clenched, his dark eyes burning with defiance. His voice, though young, carried with it a force that made even the most powerful men pause. The judge stiffened. For a brief, agonizing moment, he didn't move. His breath hitched, so imperceptible that only those watching him closely would have noticed. Then his knuckles turned white around the gavel. His face, once composed, drained of color. The gavel slipped from his grasp and struck the wooden bench with a sharp, echoing crack. The room erupted into chaos. Who is that boy? What did he just say? How does he know? The murmurs turned into frantic whispers, a ripple of confusion spreading like wildfire. But the bailiff, trained to react swiftly, moved first. His heavy boots pounded against the floor as he strode toward the boy, his posture tense, his hand instinctively reaching out. "Noah!" A desperate cry sliced through the noise. Lisa Thompson, Noah's mother, surged forward. She reached him just as the officer did, her arms shielding her son. "Don't touch him!" Lisa snapped, her voice sharp, filled with something primal, fear, protectiveness, and something deeper. The knowledge that this moment had changed everything. But Noah didn't shrink back. He didn't cower behind his mother's embrace. His eyes remained locked on the judge. And for that fleeting moment, it was just the two of them. The boy and the judge. Noah saw it, the fear. Not just shock, not just surprise, but something deeper. A recognition. A silent admission that the boy's words had struck a nerve. The courtroom buzzed with questions, but Noah barely heard them. His pulse thundered in his ears, yet he stood firm, because deep down, he knew. He had just exposed something no one was supposed to know. 2 weeks earlier, life had been simple, until the nightmare began. The world had never been fair to Noah Thompson. At just 10 years old, he had already learned a hard truth. Justice and fairness weren't the same thing. He lived with his mother, Lisa, in a tiny apartment on the south side of the city. She was a woman of quiet resilience, her hands calloused from double shifts, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but never without love. She worked 2 jobs, doing everything she could to keep food on the table. Noah rarely saw her sit down. She was always moving, always fighting, because she had no choice. Noah had always been different. Sharp, observant, stubborn. He believed in rules, but only when they were fair. He was the kind of kid who spoke up in class when a teacher ignored a student who needed help. The kind who stepped between a bully and his target, even when it meant getting hit himself. He couldn't stand injustice. And injustice, it seemed to follow him everywhere. At school, his hand shot up first, but his voice was often the last to be acknowledged. In stores, he could feel the weight of watchful eyes, expecting him to slip something into his pocket. Once, at a corner store near his apartment, Noah had saved 2 whole weeks of spare change for a candy bar. The moment he picked it up, the clerk, a gray-haired man with narrowed eyes, stiffened behind the counter. "You gonna pay for that, kid?" Noah's fingers clenched around the coins in his pocket. His stomach twisted. "Of course, sir," he said evenly, forcing himself to meet the man's gaze. The clerk took his time counting the change, eyes never leaving Noah's face, as if daring him to prove he wasn't a thief. That was the world Noah lived in, one where people assumed the worst of him before he even had a chance to prove them wrong. Lisa had always warned him, "You have to be twice as good, Noah, twice as careful." But why? Why did some people get the benefit of the doubt, while others, like him, had to fight for every ounce of respect? Yet, despite everything, Noah still believed in justice. His father had taught him that. James Thompson. For the first 5 years of his life, Noah had clung to his father's every word. James was a storyteller, filling their small apartment with tales of heroes who fought for what was right. He spoke about courage, about truth, about standing tall, even when the world tried to knock you down. But 5 years ago, James Thompson vanished. People whispered about it. They said he abandoned them. Left in the middle of the night, no warning, no goodbye. Lisa never talked about it. And when people asked, she would only say, "He's gone." But Noah never believed it. A man who taught his son about truth wouldn't lie. A man who taught his son about justice wouldn't just run away. Would he? Noah wanted to believe there was a reason. That one day his father would come back and everything would make sense. But years passed, and hope was a funny thing. It didn't shatter all at once. It crumbled piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. And just when Noah was about to let go, a letter arrived. And everything changed. It was late in the afternoon when the knock came. Lisa barely noticed it at first, just another interruption in a long, exhausting day. She had just gotten home from work, her uniform still creased from hours on her feet, her body aching for rest. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through one of his old comic books, the ones with heroes who always seemed to win in the end. Then came another knock, louder this time, more urgent. Lisa's brow furrowed. Something about it felt off. She wiped her hands on her apron, glanced at Noah, then made her way to the door. The moment she opened it, her breath caught. A man stood on the porch, tall, well-dressed, a black suit pressed so perfectly it looked untouched by the dust of the city. His face was unreadable, too still, too practiced, and in his gloved hand he held something small, a sealed envelope. Lisa's fingers twitched at her sides. "Lisa Thompson?" His voice was smooth, polite even, but something about it sent a shiver down her spine. She swallowed. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he extended the envelope toward her. "You've been summoned." Lisa didn't take it right away. Her hands stayed clenched at her sides, as if touching it would make this moment real. Then Noah appeared beside her, his small frame pressing close to her side. He was looking up at the man, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. Lisa finally took the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been, the paper thick and expensive beneath her fingertips. She slid her thumb beneath the seal, pulled out the letter inside, and the color drained from her face. Noah saw it happen, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her fingers gripped the letter so tightly the edges curled. "Mom?" His voice was cautious, uncertain. Lisa didn't answer. Her lips parted, but no words came. Noah frowned and leaned forward, trying to read over her shoulder. But before he could make out the words, the sound of tires screeching against pavement shattered the air. Blue and red lights flashed outside the apartment window. A second later, there was another knock, this time like a hammer against the wood. "Police! Open up!" Lisa spun, still clutching the letter. Her heart pounded. Noah's eyes widened. "What's happening?" She didn't have an answer. The door swung open before she could even move. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The lead officer, a man with steely eyes and a badge gleaming under the dim hallway light, looked straight at her. "Lisa Thompson?" Lisa's grip tightened on the letter. "Yes," she said, voice tight. "We need to take your son. Now." Noah's heart nearly stopped. Lisa stepped in front of him instinctively. Her protective stance was immediate, fierce. "What? Why?" The officer didn't flinch. His voice was cold. "He's been named as a witness in an ongoing case." Lisa shook her head. "A witness to what?" The officer's jaw tightened. I need you to step aside, ma'am. Lisa didn't move. Noah felt her fingers reach back and curl around his arm, holding him close like she was afraid they would tear him away. The man in the suit still stood at the door, watching, waiting. Noah's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong. And then, in a voice so quiet he barely heard himself say it, Noah whispered, "Where's my dad?" For the first time, the officer hesitated, just for a second. And that was enough. Because in that second, Noah realized this wasn't about him. This was about his father. And whatever his dad had been running from 5 years ago, it had finally caught up with them. The room felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. Lisa still stood in front of Noah, her body tense, shielding him from the officers. But Noah could see her hands trembling at her sides. The letter was still clutched in her grip, now slightly crumpled from how hard she was holding it. The lead officer shifted uncomfortably, but his voice remained cold, clipped. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." Lisa's jaw tightened. "Not until you tell me what this is about." For the first time, the officer hesitated. A flicker of something passed across his face. Was it doubt? Guilt? Whatever it was gone in an instant. "Your husband," he said finally, "James Thompson." Noah felt his stomach drop. Lisa flinched as if she had been slapped. "My husband is dead." Her voice was low, controlled, but there was something breaking beneath it. The officer exhaled sharply. "No, ma'am, he's not." The silence that followed was deafening. Noah felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. His father was alive? He wanted to believe it, had spent years hoping for it, but why was the first time he was hearing this from a police officer standing in his doorway? Lisa shook her head. "That's not possible." The officer's voice remained steady. "James didn't leave you because he wanted to, Mrs. Thompson. He was running." Lisa's breath hitched. Running from what? The officer glanced toward the open doorway, toward the man in the suit who still stood there, silent, unreadable. Then he turned back to her. The black veil. Lisa stiffened. Her lips parted slightly, as if the name alone had sucked the air from her lungs. Noah had never heard of it before, but the way his mother's face changed, the way her fingers dug into the fabric of her shirt, as if gripping onto something unseen, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just bad. This was worse. Much worse. "What is that?" Noah's voice was small, but it cut through the heavy air. The officer didn't look at him. His gaze stayed locked on Lisa. "An organization," he said. "A dangerous one. They operate in the shadows. They control judges, politicians, even the police." Something twisted in Noah's chest. "You mean like bad guys?" The officer exhaled, but it wasn't amusement, it was exhaustion. "Not just bad guys, kid, the worst kind. The kind that make the rules, so no one ever stops them." Noah's head was spinning. Why would his father have anything to do with people like that? "James worked for them once," the officer continued. "But when he found out the truth, what they were really doing, he ran. He stole something from them." He paused, then added, "Something that could bring them down." Lisa's grip on Noah's shoulder tightened. Her breathing had changed now. Faster, shallower. "What did he take?" she asked, though Noah wasn't sure she really wanted the answer. The officer hesitated. Then finally, the ledger. Lisa's breath hitched again. This time she had to reach for the wall to steady herself. "No," she whispered. The officer nodded grimly. "It's a list. Names, records, proof of every corrupt official under their control. If it ever got out, it would destroy them." Noah swallowed hard. "And my dad, he stole it?" "Yes." A chill ran down his spine. "Then why are you here?" Lisa's voice was sharper now, laced with something between rage and fear. "James isn't here. You should be looking for him, not—" The officer cut her off. "We're not the only ones looking, Mrs. Thompson." The room fell into silence. And in that silence, Noah understood. This wasn't about his father anymore. It was about them. About him. And whatever his father had done 5 years ago, it was catching up to them now. The air inside the apartment had changed. Lisa could feel it. The shift, the sudden wrongness in the air. She had sensed it even before the officer spoke those final words. "We're not the only ones looking, Mrs. Thompson." Before she noticed the way his fingers twitched near his holster. Before she saw the man in the black suit still watching from the doorway. Silent and unmoving, like a shadow waiting for its moment to strike. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a power surge. Total darkness. Lisa's breath caught. Not from surprise. but from the terrible certainty that this wasn't an accident. And then, the window shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor as the front door exploded inward. Lisa barely had time to react before masked figures poured into the apartment, dressed in black, moving with deadly precision. Noah barely saw them before Lisa grabbed him, yanking him back, shielding him with her body. "Run!" she gasped. But there was nowhere to run. The first masked figure lunged. Lisa twisted, shoving Noah behind her. Her mother's instinct overpowered her fear. Then came the second figure. And the third. Noah barely had time to scream before a gloved hand clamped over his mouth. The world tilted. His feet left the floor as someone lifted him, dragging him toward the doorway. He kicked, thrashed, fought with everything he had. "Noah!" Lisa's voice was raw with terror. She clawed at the man holding her back, but there were too many of them. Noah's vision blurred. His lungs burned from the lack of air. And then, a gunshot. The sound was deafening in the small apartment. The grip around Noah loosened. The masked man holding him stumbled back, a sharp cry escaping his lips. He fell, and Noah collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Another gunshot. Then, a voice, sharp, commanding. Female. "Get down!" Noah barely had time to process what was happening before a new figure stepped out of the shadows. She moved fast, too fast. A woman, dressed in dark tactical gear, her short hair slicked back, her gun raised with deadly precision. In a blur, she fired again, striking another attacker in the leg. The masked figure collapsed with a howl. The remaining intruders hesitated. For the first time, they weren't the ones in control. The woman turned toward Lisa, her expression tight. "We have to go, now." Lisa didn't question it. She grabbed Noah's arm, pulling him to his feet. "Who are you?" she panted. The woman's eyes flickered toward the window. Movement. More coming. "No time," she said. Then, lowering her voice, she added something that sent a shiver down Lisa's spine. "If we don't leave now, your son won't live to see morning." Lisa didn't hesitate. With one last glance at their shattered home, the life they had just lost, she tightened her grip on Noah's hand, and they ran. Noah didn't know why these people wanted him, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just about his father anymore. This was about him. The night was cold. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red as the car sped down the highway, disappearing into the darkness. Noah sat in the back seat, his heart still hammering in his chest. The weight of everything that had happened in the last few hours sat heavy on his shoulders. His home, gone. His life, shattered. His mother, silent, gripping the door handle so tightly her knuckles had turned white. And the woman driving, the one who had saved them. She hadn't spoken much since they escaped, only driving, scanning the road, gripping the wheel like she was waiting for something or someone to appear in the rearview mirror. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, but there was an edge to it, one that said she wasn't done fighting yet. The woman glanced at her. Evelyn Carter. Her voice was steady, controlled, too controlled, like someone used to handling chaos. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "And why should I trust you?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she sighed, adjusted her grip on the wheel, and then she spoke. "Because if I wanted you dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Noah felt Lisa tense beside him. Evelyn sighed again, softer this time. "Look, I get it. You don't know me. You don't trust me. But right now, I'm the only reason you're both still breathing. And if you want to keep it that way, you need to listen carefully." Lisa hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. Evelyn took a breath and glanced at Noah through the rearview mirror. "Your father isn't the man you thought he was." Noah stiffened. 5 years ago, James Thompson discovered something. Something that could destroy an entire network of corruption. A network that controls judges, politicians, law enforcement, people who are supposed to uphold justice but are nothing more than pawns in a much bigger game. Lisa's breath caught. "You mean?" Evelyn's voice hardened. "I mean the Black Veil." Silence. Even the hum of the car's engine felt distant now. They operate in the shadows, pulling strings no one even realizes exist. They don't just bend the law, Lisa. They are the law. Nothing happens without their approval. Noah swallowed hard. "And my dad? He worked for them?" Evelyn's grip on the wheel tightened. At first, but he didn't know what they really were. Not until it was too late. Lisa's face was unreadable. "What did he do?" Evelyn hesitated. "Then, finally, he stole something from them. Lisa inhaled sharply. The ledger, Noah whispered. Evelyn nodded. It's not just a list, Noah. It's everything. Names, records, transactions, every dirty secret they've ever buried. If it gets out, the black veil falls. Noah's mind raced. So where is it now? Evelyn's jaw tightened. That's the problem. Lisa leaned forward. What do you mean? Evelyn exhaled. James doesn't have it anymore. He hid it. Somewhere no one can touch it. And now, her eyes flickered toward Noah again. They think you're the key to finding it. Noah's breath hitched. Lisa's grip on his arm tightened. Outside, the night stretched on. The road ahead was empty. But Noah knew. They were no longer running from just masked assassins. They were running from the people who controlled the world. The car sped through the night, headlights cutting through the darkness. The hum of the engine was the only sound for a long time. Noah sat in the back seat, his mind racing. His father had stolen something so powerful it could destroy the people who controlled the world. And now those people were hunting him. But why me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. She knew this question was coming. Because, Noah, she said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror, your father didn't just hide the ledger. He hid it. Inside you. Noah's breath caught. What? Lisa turned sharply toward Evelyn, eyes flashing with disbelief. That's impossible. Evelyn shook her head. No, it's not. Your husband was brilliant, Lisa. He knew the black veil would stop at nothing to get it back. He couldn't just hide it in a safe or a bank. He needed a place no one would ever suspect. Somewhere no one could touch. She looked at Noah again, her gaze unreadable. So he put it inside his son. Noah's hands clenched into fists. I don't understand, he said. His heart pounded as memories of his father flickered through his mind. Bedtime stories, lullabies, secret handshakes, the way James always seemed to repeat certain phrases, as if making sure Noah would never forget them. Lisa shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Noah was just a little boy. Exactly, Evelyn said. No one would ever think to look there. She sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. James didn't just steal a list of names. He stole their entire operation, their transactions, their offshore accounts, the proof that could take them all down. He encoded it, broke it into pieces. Then somehow, he embedded it into Noah's subconscious memory. Noah's stomach twisted. But I don't remember anything. Evelyn nodded. That's the point. It's locked away, buried deep in your mind. Maybe in a song your dad used to sing to you, a bedtime story. A set of numbers disguised as a game. She paused. And the black veil knows it. The words hung heavy in the air. Lisa's face paled. So they don't want to kill him. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Not yet. Noah shuddered. They weren't hunting him to kill him. They were hunting him to use him, to crack open the secrets inside his own head. And when they had what they wanted, what would happen to him then? The realization settled into his bones. They couldn't run forever. If he was the key, then sooner or later, he would have to unlock the truth. The safe house was eerily quiet, too quiet. Noah sat on the worn-out couch, his fingers gripping the fabric, his mind still reeling from what Evelyn had told him. He was the key. The ledger was inside him, and the black veil would do anything to get it. Lisa paced near the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her body tense. She hadn't stopped moving since they arrived. She kept glancing outside as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. Evelyn stood near the door, her gun resting against her hip, her posture rigid. Then a knock. Noah's breath caught. Lisa froze. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. In an instant she raised her weapon, signaling for them to stay back. Another knock, this time louder, more forceful. Evelyn moved cautiously, peeking through the small gap in the blinds. Then, after a long moment, she exhaled and lowered her gun. It's okay. It's him. Lisa's shoulders sagged in relief. The door opened, and a tall man in a police uniform stepped inside. Officer Daniels. Noah had met him once before. He had been one of the officers assigned to protect them after the attack on their home. He had always spoken to Noah kindly, his deep voice steady, his presence reassuring. You're safe now, Daniels said, stepping forward. Lisa let out a shaky breath. Thank God. Daniels' face was serious. We need to move. The safe house is compromised. Evelyn stiffened. How do you know? Daniels met her gaze, his jaw tight. We intercepted a transmission. The black veil is closing in. If we don't leave now, we won't get another chance. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Let's go. She turned to Noah and Lisa. Stay close to me. Noah stood up, his legs slightly unsteady. Lisa reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. They didn't question Daniels. They should have. The moment they stepped outside, everything fell apart. Before Noah could even register what was happening, black SUVs screeched into the alleyway, Porsche, their doors flying open. Men in black tactical gear swarmed forward. Lisa gasped, but it was already too late. Daniels spun, grabbing Noah by the arm. "Let me go!" Noah yelled, struggling against the officer's iron grip. Lisa lunged forward, but one of the masked men slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. "Noah!" Noah kicked wildly, trying to break free, but Daniel's grip was like steel. This wasn't a rescue. This was a setup. "You lied!" Evelyn roared, reaching for her gun. But before she could fire, another man struck her from behind. She fell, gasping in pain. Noah's chest tightened as fear clawed up his throat. "Let go of me," he screamed, his voice raw, desperate. Lisa fought against the man holding her back, her voice cracking with fury and terror. "No! Please, give me back my son!" Daniels didn't even look at her. With one final yank, he dragged Noah toward the waiting SUV. Lisa's scream shattered the night. "Noah!" The last thing Noah saw before the door slammed shut, his mother, on her knees, desperate, helpless. The car peeled away, tires screeching, and Noah realized in that moment he was alone. The cold metal chair dug into Noah's back. His wrists were bound behind him, the rope biting into his skin. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with a damp, suffocating silence. The only sound was the steady drip, drip of water from a leaking pipe somewhere above. He didn't know how long he had been here. Hours, days. Fear clawed at his chest, but he refused to let it show. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the empty room like a countdown. And then he appeared. Silas. Noah had never seen him before, but he knew instantly this was the man everyone feared. Dressed in an immaculate black suit, he didn't look like a monster. No scars, no wild eyes, no signs of brutality. But Noah knew better, because Silas didn't need to raise his fists to be dangerous. His power was in his words. He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor, and stopped just a few feet away. A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips. "You're braver than I expected." His voice was smooth, almost casual, like they were two old friends catching up. Noah stayed silent, his jaw clenched. Silas tilted his head. "No screaming? No begging? Most people do." Noah glared. "I'm not most people." Silas let out a quiet chuckle, as if amused. Then, slowly, he pulled out a folder. Noah's breath hitched. He recognized it. It was old, the edges frayed, but the second Silas placed it on the table, Noah saw the name stamped across the front. James Thompson, his father's name. His pulse quickened. Silas noticed. "Ah," he said, tapping the folder lightly, "so you do know what this is." Noah swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay still. "What do you want?" Silas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table between them. "I want you to understand something, Noah." His fingers drummed lightly against the folder. "You think your father was a hero, a good man, a man who stood for justice." Silas paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with an almost regretful sigh, he pushed the folder toward Noah. "But you've been lied to." Noah's stomach twisted. "Your father wasn't fighting against us." Silas's voice softened, like he was delivering bad news to a child. "He was one of us." Noah stiffened. "That's not true," Silas smiled. Not a cruel smile, but one of quiet confidence. "Isn't it?" He opened the folder. Inside, photos. James Thompson, younger, standing beside men dressed just like Silas, shaking hands with them, smiling. Noah's breath caught. Another photo, his father sitting at a table covered in documents, signing something. Another, James standing next to Daniels. "No." Noah shook his head. "You're lying." Silas let out a soft sigh, closing the folder. "Why would I lie, Noah? What do I gain from this?" His voice was so calm, so patient. "I know you want to believe he was different, that he was better. But people don't change, Noah. Not really." He leaned closer. "The man you thought was your hero? He worked for us, willingly, proudly, until he stole from us." Noah's thoughts spun. The pictures, the way Daniels had betrayed them, everything he thought he knew. Was it all a lie? Silas saw the hesitation in Noah's eyes, and he knew he had won the first battle. "Now tell me, Noah," he murmured, his voice like silk, "if your father really wanted to protect you, why did he leave you with something that could get you killed?" Noah couldn't answer, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he knew who his father really was. The room felt like it was closing in. Noah's mind was a storm, Silas's words still circling like vultures. If your father really wanted to protect you, why did he leave you with something that could get you killed? The seed of doubt had been planted, and Silas knew it. He leaned forward, watching Noah carefully, his voice turning almost gentle. It's hard, isn't it, learning the truth? He sighed, shaking his head. I almost feel sorry for you. Noah clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. Then, a noise, soft at first, a distant creak, like pressure on an old floorboard. Silas's eyes flickered toward the door. Noah barely had time to register what was happening before. Boom, the door exploded inward, wood splintering in every direction. Silas barely turned before a dark figure lunged through the smoke. Noah's heart stopped. James, his father, alive and furious. James moved with relentless speed, a man who had nothing left to lose. His fist slammed into Silas's jaw before the man could even react. The impact sent Silas staggering back, crashing into the table. A deep, guttural groan escaped his lips as he wiped the blood from his mouth. Silas blinked, momentarily stunned. Then he laughed. Well, his voice was smooth, unfazed. Back from the dead, are we? James's eyes burned with an unforgiving fire. You should have left my son alone. Silas smirked, but there was something different this time, a flicker of caution. And here I thought you'd come back to finish what you started. He tilted his head. You remember, don't you, the things you did for us? James didn't hesitate. He swung again, this time catching Silas across the ribs. Silas grunted, his breath hitching. The smirk faded. The two men circled each other, years of unspoken history and betrayal boiling beneath the surface. Noah's pulse pounded. This wasn't just a fight. This was war. Silas lunged first, a blur of motion, a fist aiming straight for James's throat. But James was faster. He twisted, dodging the strike, grabbing Silas by the collar and driving him into the wall. Crash! The impact rattled the room. Silas coughed, gasping for breath, but he wasn't finished. With a sharp elbow, he struck James in the side, breaking free. James stumbled back, catching himself, his breath heavy. Silas wiped his mouth again, his fingers coming away red. His expression darkened. You're too late, James. He motioned toward Noah, his voice dripping with satisfaction. The boy already doubts you. James's gaze flickered toward Noah. For the first time in years, they locked eyes. And in that moment, Noah saw something. Not just a fighter, not just a man chasing redemption, but his father, his protector. And suddenly, the doubt shattered. You don't get to take my son from me. James's voice was a low growl. Silas exhaled dramatically, shaking his head. Who said I need to? He reached for the gun at his waist. Noah's stomach dropped. James moved first, a blur, a struggle, a single gunshot. Then, Silas fell. The room plunged into silence. James stood over his motionless body, his chest heaving, his hands trembling around the gun. Then slowly he turned to Noah. Noah couldn't breathe. His father was here, real, alive, and for the first time he knew. James had never abandoned him. James swallowed hard, his voice raw. I'm here, son. Noah felt something hot sting his eyes, but the fight wasn't over. The black veil was still out there, and Noah still held the key to their destruction. The air was thick with tension. Noah's hands trembled as he stared at the laptop screen in front of him. The dimly lit warehouse was eerily silent except for the soft hum of the old computer. A single camera was set up, its red light blinking, a live broadcast. Millions of people were watching. The world was watching. This was it. He could still hear his father's voice behind him, steady, reassuring. You can do this, son. But could he? For years, he had no idea. No idea that his father had hidden something inside his own mind. No idea that the ledger wasn't some file or document. It was a sequence of numbers, an encryption key, buried deep in his memory. And now, if he got this wrong, the black veil would win. They would bury the truth. They would hunt him, his mother, and his father forever. Noah took a shaky breath. Then he closed his eyes, a memory. His father's voice, humming softly as he tucked him into bed. Sleep tight, buddy. Always remember, 10-4-6-2. Another memory. A game they played when he was little, James tapping patterns into his palm. Tap, tap, pause, tap, a rhythm repeating over and over. Noah's breath hitched. It wasn't just a lullaby. It wasn't just a game. It was a code. And he knew it. His eyes snapped open. His fingers moved on the keyboard, typing the numbers that had been locked in his subconscious for years. 10-4-6-2, 99-3-1, 87-12-5. The screen flickered, a progress bar appeared. Decrypting, a second passed, then two. Noah's heart pounded. And the screen filled with files, names, transactions, evidence. The entire network of corruption laid bare. A flood of classified documents leaked live in front of millions. He heard his father exhale. Lisa let out a choked sob. And then, the world exploded. The chat on the live stream erupted with messages. Is this real? My God, these are government officials. They've been lying to us. Arrests need to happen now. Noah barely had time to process it before his father grabbed his shoulder. We have to go. Because even as the truth spread across the world, even as journalists scrambled to verify what they were seeing, the Black Veil wouldn't go down without a fight. Suddenly, boom! The warehouse shook as gunfire erupted outside. They were coming. Lisa grabbed Noah's hand, her voice urgent. Run. Chaos. The Black Veil was crumbling, but not quietly. One by one, screens across the country flashed with breaking news. Government officials arrested in widespread corruption scandal. Dozens of high-profile judges and politicians indicted. The Black Veil, the secret cabal controlling the system, exposed. The world knew the truth, and the empire the Black Veil had built for decades was burning. But Noah wasn't thinking about that. He was running, with his mother, with his father, with the knowledge that he had done the impossible. He had survived, he had won, and for the first time in his life, bookmark, go back. He was free. What a journey, right? Noah's courage changed everything, proving that even in the darkest moments, truth and justice can still win. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps. Share this with friends and family who love powerful, inspiring stories. And if you want more content like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next one.